A billionaire abandoned his illegitimate child at a junkyard. Years later, he was shocked too. Thunder crackled across the midnight sky as Keith Warburton sat alone in his study, illuminated only by the gentle flicker of his desk lamp. His trembling hands held two documents that would haunt him forever: divorce papers and Michelle's last letter, dated 7 years ago. The expensive bourbon in his crystal tumbler remained untouched, much like his conscience over the past years. The grandfather clock's steady ticking echoed through the mansion's hollow halls, each sound a reminder of that fateful night. Lightning flashed through the tall windows, casting harsh shadows across Keith's face as his mother's words from that evening replayed in his mind with cruel clarity. The Warburton name demands an heir, Keith. We can't waste time on a barren marriage. He closed his eyes, but the memory only intensified. Michelle standing in the doorway, her delicate frame trembling not from the cold, but from the weight of his betrayal. "If you do this, Keith," she had whispered, her voice breaking, "if you choose your family's legacy over our love, I'll never forgive you." Rain had soaked through her thin cardigan as she clutched a small suitcase, her wedding ring catching one final glint of lightning before she disappeared into the storm. What Keith didn't know, what Kimberly Warburton had made sure he wouldn't know, was that Michelle carried more than just her broken dreams as she walked away that night. The truth lay in an unopened letter, tucked away in his mother's desk drawer, bearing news that would have changed everything. Michelle was carrying twins. Now, 7 years later, Keith stared at the divorce papers before him, his marriage to Victoria White the socially acceptable choice, crumbling under the weight of years of emptiness. The irony wasn't lost on him. He had sacrificed true love for a legacy that felt increasingly meaningless. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Mr. Warburton, his assistant, called through the door. "Your mother insists you review the Chicago business proposal immediately." Keith's hand tightened around Michelle's letter. Chicago. The city where it all ended. The city where, unknown to him, his own flesh and blood had taken their first breaths without him. "Tell her I'll be there shortly," he responded, his voice hollow. As thunder rolled again outside, Keith couldn't shake the feeling that his carefully constructed world was about to shatter, and perhaps it needed to. The Warburton mansion stood as a testament to old money and power in New York's elite society, its limestone facade and wrought iron gates serving as physical barriers between the family's carefully curated world and the common masses below. For 5 generations, the Warburtons had built their empire through strategic marriages, calculated business decisions, and an unwavering commitment to preserving their bloodline's purity. At the heart of this dynasty sat Kimberly Warburton, a woman whose elegance masked a will of steel. Her silver-streaked dark hair was always perfectly coiffed, her designer suits immaculate, and her smile practiced to perfection. But those who knew her well understood that, behind her polished exterior, lay a master manipulator who viewed people as chess pieces in her grand design for the Warburton legacy. Kimberly had learned the art of control from her own mother-in-law, absorbing the lessons of power like a deadly poison. When her husband Charles died young, leaving her with a teenage Keith, she didn't mourn, she planned. The widow's grief became her armor, and her son became her purpose. Every decision in Keith's life, from his private school education to his social circles, was carefully orchestrated by Kimberly's invisible hand. A Warburton, she would often say, her voice soft but sharp as a blade, doesn't merely exist in society, we shape it. These words were drilled into Keith's consciousness from childhood, along with endless lessons about responsibility, duty, and the weight of their name. Family portraits lining the mansion's halls served as silent witnesses to generations of Warburtons who had carried this burden before him. Keith's childhood was a carefully choreographed performance. His playmates were the children of other elite families, his hobbies appropriately refined, and his education focused on preparing him to take over the family's vast business holdings. Love, in Kimberly's world, was secondary to duty. Happiness was a luxury that could be sacrificed for the greater good of the Warburton name. As Keith grew into manhood, he found himself trapped between his mother's expectations and his own desires. His broad shoulders carried the weight of centuries of tradition, while his heart yearned for something real in a world built on carefully maintained appearances. In board meetings and charity galas, he played his part perfectly, the handsome, capable heir to the Warburton fortune. But alone in his study, he would often stare at his reflection in the window, wondering if the man looking back at him was truly himself or merely his mother's creation. Kimberly's influence extended far beyond the family's personal lives. The Warburton Industries board members knew better than to question her suggestions even after Keith officially took over as CEO. Her network of social connections resembled a spider's web, with every silk strand capable of building or destroying reputations with a single whispered word at the right dinner party. Power, she would tell Keith, isn't about being the loudest voice in the room. It's about ensuring that every other voice speaks in harmony with your wishes. This philosophy had served her well, allowing her to manipulate situations without ever appearing to be directly involved. When she disapproved of Keith's college friendships, those friends would mysteriously receive opportunities in distant cities. When she found his early career choices lacking, better options would suddenly present themselves. The turning point in Keith's internal struggle came when he met Michelle at a charity event, the one variable his mother hadn't managed to control. Michelle's genuine warmth and lack of pretense cut through years of carefully constructed walls. For the first time, Keith found himself making decisions his mother hadn't orchestrated, seeking moments of real connection in a world built on artificial relationships. Kimberly watched this development with growing concern. She saw how Keith's eyes would light up when Michelle entered a room, noted how his laughter became genuine rather than polite in her presence. This unplanned element in her carefully controlled universe threatened everything she had built. The fact that Michelle came from a middle-class background only compounded Kimberly's disapproval. Love, Kimberly told Keith during one of their tense conversations, is a luxury we cannot afford. The Warburton name carries responsibilities that transcend personal happiness. But she delivered these words while standing in front of the family portrait, her figure aligned with generations of stern-faced ancestors who seemed to reinforce her message. The internal war in Keith's soul intensified. Each morning he would walk through the mansion's halls, past the portraits of his ancestors, feeling their painted eyes following his every move. The weight of their expectations, combined with his mother's constant presence, created a pressure that threatened to crush his spirit. Business meetings became a refuge, where decisions about mergers and acquisitions were straightforward compared to the complexity of his personal struggles. Keith threw himself into work, excelling in the corporate world while his internal world crumbled. His colleagues praised his dedication, never knowing it was really an escape. Yet even as he tried to fulfill his family obligations, Keith found himself drawn more deeply into Michelle's world, a world where laughter wasn't measured, where love wasn't calculated, and where happiness wasn't seen as a weakness. This taste of freedom made his gilded cage increasingly unbearable. As pressure mounted from both sides, Keith began to show signs of strain. His hand had trembled slightly during board meetings. Dark circles appeared under his eyes. He found himself standing in front of the family portrait late at night, arguing silently with generations of Warburtons about the true meaning of legacy. The mansion itself seemed to close in around him, its grandeur feeling more suffocating than impressive. Every crystal chandelier, every antique vase, every perfectly maintained garden became another link in the chain that bound him to his family's expectations. The weight of the Warburton name, once a source of pride, now felt like a burden threatening to break him. Michelle Parker grew up in a modest two-story home in suburban Boston, where love filled the spaces that money couldn't. Her father, a high school teacher, and her mother, a nurse, had instilled in her the values of hard work, integrity, and the belief that true worth came from character rather than bank accounts. Their small kitchen, with its worn linoleum floor and cheerful yellow curtains, hosted more genuine laughter and warmth than many grand dining rooms. Unlike the carefully curated education of the elite, Michelle's schooling was a mix of public school determination and natural intelligence. She worked afternoons at the local library, saving every dollar for college while maintaining top grades. Her dream of becoming a business owner wasn't born from family legacy but from watching her parents manage their modest resources with dignity and wisdom. Fortune favored her dedication when she earned a partial scholarship to Harvard Business School. The day she received her acceptance letter, her parents celebrated by ordering Chinese takeout, a luxury in their household. "You see, sweetheart," her father had said, eyes glistening with pride, "dreams don't care about your zip code." Her first days at Harvard were a culture shock. Designer bags and luxury cars surrounded her as she clutched her second-hand laptop and wore clothes from discount stores. Yet Michelle refused to be intimidated. She learned to carry herself with quiet confidence, letting her intelligence and work ethic speak louder than her bank account. It was during her second year that fate intervened. While working a catering job at a charity gala, another way she helped fund her education, she literally bumped into Keith Warburton, spilling water down his expensive suit. Instead of the angry reaction she expected, she was met with kind eyes and a genuine laugh that seemed out of place in the formal setting. "I needed an excuse to leave early anyway," he had joked, helping her pick up the scattered glasses. That moment, brief as it was, sparked something neither of them could have predicted. Keith found himself seeking her out at future events, drawn to her authentic nature in his world of careful pretense. Their courtship was a study in contrasts. Keith would pick her up from her cramped student apartment in his luxury car, looking somewhat out of place but not caring. Michelle introduced him to the simple pleasure of hot dogs in the park and midnight diner coffee. He showed her art galleries and symphony halls, but it was her enthusiasm and fresh perspective that made these experiences special. For Michelle, falling in love with Keith wasn't about his wealth or status. She fell for the man who would sit for hours listening to her dreams of opening a cafe, who laughed genuinely at her jokes, who seemed to come alive when they escaped the confines of his social circle. In him, she saw someone trapped in a golden cage, yearning for the authentic connection she had grown up with. And their relationship developed in quiet moments stolen between his business meetings and her study sessions. Coffee shops became their sanctuary, where Keith could shed the weight of the Warburton name and simply be himself. Michelle's small apartment, with its mismatched furniture and walls covered in postcards, became a haven where titles and bank accounts didn't matter. However, Kimberly Warburton's shadow loomed large over their happiness. The first time Michelle met Keith's mother, the temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Kimberly's smile was polite, but her eyes were calculating, measuring Michelle like a threat to be neutralized. "How?" "Interesting," Kimberly had said, examining Michelle's simple dress with a gaze that could freeze water. "And what does your family do?" The question was loaded with unspoken judgment, a reminder that in their world heritage mattered more than heart. Despite Kimberly's disapproval, their love deepened. Keith proposed on a rainy evening in Michelle's apartment, no grand gestures or public displays, just honest words and genuine emotion. The ring was his grandmother's, a fact that infuriated Kimberly when she learned of it. This piece of family history now adorned the finger of someone she deemed unworthy. Their wedding was a battleground of competing visions. Kimberly pushed for a grand society affair, while Michelle wanted something intimate and meaningful. They compromised on a medium-sized ceremony, but tensions simmered beneath every decision. Even as Michelle walked down the aisle, she could feel Kimberly's disapproving gaze following her every step. The early days of their marriage were a delicate balance. Michelle worked to establish her small business consulting firm, determined to prove her worth beyond her marriage. Keith supported her dreams while navigating the increasing pressure from his family. They created their own sanctuary in a penthouse apartment that Michelle decorated with a mix of antiques and cozy touches, making it their own despite Kimberly's frequent suggestions for improvement. But the weight of the Warburton expectations began to take its toll. Every society event became an examination, every family dinner a subtle interrogation. Michelle maintained her dignity, but the constant scrutiny wore on her. Keith found himself caught between defending his wife and appeasing his mother, a battle that left everyone wounded. Their love, though genuine, was being tested by forces larger than themselves. The fairy tale of the wealthy heir and the ordinary girl faced the harsh reality of social expectations and family traditions. Yet Michelle held on to hope, believing that their love could bridge any gap, overcome any obstacle. What she couldn't have known was that their greatest test lay ahead, and that the strength she had built throughout her life would soon be pushed to its absolute limits. The simple values she had learned in that modest Boston home would become her anchor in the storm that was about to break. Dr. Andrew Foster moved through life with a quiet grace that belied his complex past. His medical practice in Chicago had earned him respect, but few knew the weight of secrets he carried. Tall and distinguished with kind hazel eyes, he had the sort of presence that put patients at ease instantly. His office, decorated with children's drawings and thank you cards, reflected the genuine care he showed to everyone who walked through his door. Behind his gentle demeanor lay a carefully guarded truth. He was born Andrew Warburton, the firstborn son who had disappeared from family photos and conversations. 20 years ago, he had chosen his medical career over the family empire, leading to his banishment by Kimberly. He changed his name, built a new life, and carried his past like a silent shadow. Sometimes healing others helps heal yourself, he would say to his younger colleagues, though they never fully understood the depth behind those words. His choice of Chicago as home wasn't random. It was far enough from New York to avoid his family, yet close enough to keep an eye on the brother he'd been forced to leave behind. Victoria White, now Victoria Warburton, entered the story as Kimberly's perfect choice for Keith. Born into old money, she possessed the pedigree and social graces the Warburton name demanded. Her life had been as carefully orchestrated as Keith's private schools, social debuts, and the expectation of an advantageous marriage. Yet beneath her polished exterior, Victoria harbored her own quiet rebellion. She had dreamed of becoming a photographer, filling secret albums with artistic shots that would never see gallery walls. Her marriage to Keith was a business arrangement dressed as romance, and both of them knew it. "We're both prisoners of expectations," she once confided to her diary. Playing parts in someone else's story, her relationship with Keith was built on mutual understanding rather than passion. Two people trapped in the same gilded cage, trying to make the best of their situation. The cafe community that would become Michelle's support system was a vibrant tapestry of diverse lives. Rose Martinez, a retired schoolteacher, was the first to welcome Michelle to the neighborhood. Her small bookshop next to the future cafe location became a sanctuary during Michelle's early days in Chicago. "Honey, sometimes family is who you choose, not who chose you," Rose would say, offering Michelle tea and wisdom in equal measure. Her shop hosted a weekly book club that became Michelle's first social circle in her new life. Sarah Chen, owner of the local flower shop, contributed more than just beautiful arrangements to the cafe. Her friendship offered Michelle insights into running a small business while raising children alone. Sarah's twins, though older than Michelle's, made Carl and Oliver feel less alone in their unique family situation. The heart of this community was Eddie Thompson, a former Wall Street banker who had left the corporate world to open a small diner. His business advice proved invaluable, but more importantly, his story of choosing authenticity over status resonated deeply with Michelle's situation. "Success isn't about the number of zeros in your bank account," Eddie would say, helping Michelle with her business plan. "It's about being able to look in the mirror and respect who you see." His diner became a gathering place for local business owners, forming an informal support network that would prove crucial in times ahead. The cafe's first employees became extended family. Jenny, a college student working part-time, saw Michelle as both boss and mentor. Tom, the retired Marine who handled maintenance, appointed himself unofficial protector of Michelle and the twins. Maria, the talented baker, brought her grandmother's recipes and maternal warmth to the growing business. This community created something Kimberly's social circle could never comprehend: genuine connections built on trust and mutual support rather than obligation and advantage. When one struggled, others stepped in without hesitation. Success was celebrated collectively and setbacks faced together. Sunday gatherings in the cafe after closing became a tradition. Everyone brought dishes to share, children played while adults talked, and the warmth of genuine friendship filled the space. These evenings stood in stark contrast to the formal dinner parties of Michelle's past life, proving that true wealth couldn't be measured in silver and crystal. Each member of this extended family played a crucial role in the story to come. Victoria's quiet acts of rebellion would ripple through the Warburton dynasty. Andrew's medical expertise and hidden identity would intersect with Michelle's life in unexpected ways. The cafe community's strength would be tested and proven when Kimberly's plans threatened their own. These supporting characters, each with their own dreams, struggles, and secrets, created a safety net that would catch Michelle when her world turned upside down. Their loyalty wasn't bought with money or influence, but earned through genuine connection and shared experiences. Together, they formed a contrast to the world Michelle had left behind, proving that true family could be found in the most unexpected places. And that strength often came from the bonds we choose rather than the ones we choose, rather than the ones we're born into. The beginning of the end started in a sterile hospital corridor on a crisp autumn morning. Michelle sat alone in the waiting room of Manhattan's most prestigious fertility clinic, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. 3 years of marriage, 3 years of trying, and now the weight of expectations hung heavy in the air-conditioned silence. Dr. Rebecca Stone's office was exactly what one would expect from a physician who catered to New York's elite, tastefully decorated in muted tones, with degrees from prestigious institutions lining the walls. What Michelle couldn't know was that Dr. Stone's recent appointment to the clinic had come through Kimberly Warburton's careful maneuvering. Mrs. Warburton, Dr. Stone began, her voice professionally sympathetic as she reviewed the file before her. "I'm afraid the results aren't what we hoped for," she proceeded to explain in medical terms that seemed designed to confuse rather than clarify. The carefully crafted message was clear: Michelle's chances of conceiving were allegedly minimal. What neither Michelle nor Keith knew was that the real test results, showing perfect fertility, had been sealed in an envelope and handed directly to Kimberly Warburton the previous evening. The matriarch had orchestrated every detail, from the selection of the doctor to the timing of the appointment. "I understand this is difficult," Dr. Stone continued, avoiding direct eye contact, "but there are other options we can discuss." The words hung in the air like a sentence, each syllable another nail in the coffin of Michelle's dreams of motherhood. Keith sat beside Michelle, his face a mask of controlled emotion. His hand gripped hers, but his mind was already racing with the implications. The Warburton legacy, the family name, his mother's constant reminders of duty, all of it crashed around him like waves against a crumbling seawall. That evening, the Warburton mansion felt colder than usual. Kimberly waited in the library, a glass of sherry in hand, her face a study in calculated concern. "Keith, darling," she began as her son entered, "Dr. Stone called me about the results." Her voice carried just the right note of sympathy, masking the satisfaction beneath. "It's not fair," Mother Keith said, slumping into a leather armchair. "Michelle doesn't deserve this." His weakness showed in the slight tremor of his hands, in the way his shoulders hunched under the weight of the situation. Kimberly moved with practiced grace, placing a maternal hand on her son's shoulder. "Life rarely is fair, dear, but we must think of the family name. The Warburton legacy cannot end with you." Her words were poison wrapped in silk, each syllable carefully chosen to push her son toward her desired outcome. Over the next few weeks, the pressure mounted subtly but relentlessly. Kimberly arranged dinners with family friends who coincidentally had sons without heirs. She left genealogy books open to pages highlighting the importance of succession. Every conversation somehow circled back to legacy and duty. Michelle noticed the change in Keith, the way he grew distant, how his eyes would dart away when she tried to discuss their future. She threw herself into research seeking second opinions, alternative treatments. But each doctor she contacted seemed to reach the same conclusion, all carefully orchestrated by Kimberly's invisible hand. The strain began to show in their marriage. Dinner conversations became stilted, filled with unspoken words and growing resentment. Keith spent longer hours at the office, drowning himself in work rather than facing the reality at home. Michelle's attempts to discuss adoption were met with uncomfortable silence. Kimberly's masterstroke came during a family gathering. She arranged for Victoria White to attend, young, beautiful, and from an impeccable family background. More importantly, Victoria came with a proven family history of fertility, a fact Kimberly casually mentioned over cocktails. Keith's resolve weakened further with each passing day. He watched Michelle's pain, saw her determination to find solutions, but found himself paralyzed by the expectations placed upon him. His mother's words echoed in his mind: the Warburton name has survived wars, depressions, and scandals. It cannot end because of sentiment. The final blow came during a board meeting when an elderly board member, prompted by Kimberly, mentioned the importance of secure succession for the company's future. Keith sat there, feeling the weight of generations of Warburtons pressing down on him, while his mother watched with carefully concealed triumph. That night, Keith made his choice, or rather, surrendered to the choice his mother had engineered for him. He didn't know that at that very moment. Michelle was in their bathroom, staring at a home pregnancy test that would never be revealed, her hands trembling with a mixture of joy and fear. The irony of timing would haunt them both in years to come, the truth obscured by a web of lies and manipulation, orchestrated by a woman who believed she was protecting a legacy, but was instead destroying lives in the process. The storm that raged outside the Warburton mansion that fateful night seemed to mirror the turmoil within. Rain lashed against century-old windows as Michelle stood in the foyer, a small suitcase at her feet, her world crumbling around her. The grandfather clock struck midnight, each chime echoing through the mansion like a funeral bell. But "It's better this way," Keith said, his voice hollow, unable to meet her eyes. He stood at the base of the grand staircase, his knuckles white as he gripped the banister. The man before her was a shadow of the one she'd married, broken down by weeks of his mother's relentless pressure. Michelle clutched her stomach unconsciously, the secret of her pregnancy still unspoken. She had discovered it just days ago, but hadn't found the right moment to tell Keith, or perhaps, deep down, she had sensed the approaching storm. "Keith, please," she whispered, "there's something you need to know." But Kimberly chose that moment to appear at the top of the stairs, her silk robe and perfect composure a stark contrast to Michelle's rain-dampened clothes. "The car is waiting, dear," she announced, her voice dripping with false concern. "But I've arranged for you to stay at the plaza until you make other arrangements." Michelle's letter to Keith, written in the back of the taxi the next morning, never reached its destination. Kimberly's weekly inspection of the mail ensured that. Over the following months, every attempt at communication was intercepted, phone calls blocked, emails filtered, messages misplaced. Kimberly created an impenetrable wall between her son and the woman carrying his children. The plaza's luxury suite felt like a gilded prison. Michelle stayed only one night, the opulence around her feeling like a final mockery of everything she'd lost. The next morning, she withdrew what she could from her personal account before Kimberly could freeze it, and bought a train ticket to Chicago, a city large enough to disappear in, far enough to start over. Her first weeks in Chicago were a study in survival. The modest hotel room she could afford was a far cry from the Warburton mansion, but it offered anonymity. Morning sickness became a constant companion, made worse by the stress of job hunting and apartment searching. She learned to navigate the city's public transportation, swallowing her pride as she interviewed for positions far below her qualifications. The reality of her situation hit hardest during her first prenatal appointment at a public clinic. Sitting in a crowded waiting room, filling out forms with trembling hands, she left the father's information section blank. The ultrasound technician's excited announcement of twins brought both joy and terror. 2 babies meant twice the responsibility, twice the challenge. Back in New York, Kimberly orchestrated a careful campaign of misinformation. When Michelle's parents tried to reach out to Keith, they were told their daughter had requested no contact. When Keith asked about Michelle, Kimberly produced carefully edited reports suggesting Michelle had moved on, was traveling in Europe, had found someone new. The pregnancy progressed, and Michelle's determination grew alongside her expanding belly. She found work as a waitress at a small cafe, her business degree temporarily set aside for survival. The owner, Rose, took one look at her situation and offered her the apartment above the cafe at a reduced rent. It became her sanctuary, a small space where she could finally let her guard down and talk to her unborn children. Each night, Michelle wrote in her journal, documenting everything for her children to read someday. She detailed their father's kind eyes, his genuine laugh, the way he had once loved her before duty tore them apart. These words were her way of ensuring her children would know they were born from love, even if that love hadn't been strong enough to withstand Kimberly's manipulation. Meanwhile, Keith threw himself into work, drowning his guilt in 16-hour days and endless meetings. He kept Michelle's photo locked in his desk drawer, taking it out late at night when the office was empty. Several times, he drafted emails to her, but never sent them, convinced by his mother's lies that Michelle wanted no contact. The transformation of Michelle from society wife to single mother-to-be was both painful and empowering. She learned to navigate pregnancy alone, attending birthing classes where other women had partners to support them. Each kick from her twins reminded her that while she might be alone, she was never lonely. She carried with her the most precious parts of her past life. The cafe's regular customers watched her belly grow and adopted her into their community. They brought her prenatal vitamins, shared maternity clothes, offered advice and support. But this informal family filled some of the void left by the one that had rejected her, proving that sometimes the family you choose is stronger than the family you're born or married into. As her due date approached, Michelle prepared for motherhood with the same determination that had gotten her through Harvard. She read every book she could find, took infant care classes, and converted half her tiny living room into a nursery. The simple wooden cribs she assembled herself were a far cry from the antique Warburton family cradles, but they were bought with honest work and genuine love. The Chicago winter bit deep into Michelle's bones as she stepped off the train at Union Station, one suitcase holding everything left of her former life. The city's towering skyline loomed before her, a maze of steel and glass that felt both threatening and full of possibility. At 12 weeks pregnant, her body held secrets that would soon reshape her entire world. Her first stop was a modest hotel off Michigan Avenue, where the desk clerk's sympathetic glance at her wedding ring told her she wasn't the first woman to seek refuge here. The room was small but clean, with a view of brick walls and fire escapes a far cry from the panoramic views of Central Park she'd left behind. The morning sickness hit hardest during her first prenatal appointment at Cook County Hospital. Sitting in the crowded waiting room, surrounded by other expectant mothers, Michelle felt both completely alone and strangely connected to every woman there. The ultrasound technician's gasp, followed by a warm smile, changed everything. "Congratulations, you're carrying twins." Those words echoed in her tiny hotel room that night as she lay awake, hands pressed against her still flat stomach. Twins. 2 babies. Double the blessing, double the responsibility. The irony of being deemed infertile by doctor. Stone's manipulated diagnosis wasn't lost on her, but grief had no place in her heart. Now she had to focus on survival. The search for work proved challenging. Her Harvard MBA meant little without references, and her growing pregnancy made many employers hesitant. She found temporary salvation at Bean Brew, a small cafe in a diverse neighborhood where the owner, Rose Martinez, saw past her careful evasions about her past. "Everyone has a story," Rose had said, handing Michelle an apron. "What matters is where you're going, not where you've been." The cafe became more than a workplace, it became the foundation for her new life. The regular customers, mostly local business owners and families, created a community that wrapped around her like a warm blanket. Living above the cafe in a converted storage space wasn't ideal, but it offered security. Michelle transformed the space with careful budgeting, yard sale furniture, second-hand baby items, and creative solutions for storage. Each addition was a small victory, paid for with honest work rather than a platinum card. Dr. Andrew Foster entered her life during a medical emergency, severe morning sickness that sent her to the ER. His gentle competence and lack of judgment when she couldn't provide her full medical history marked him as different from other doctors she'd encountered. He became her regular physician, though neither could have predicted how their lives would intertwine. The cafe's community rallied around her pregnancy in unexpected ways. Sarah Chen, the florist next door, shared her experiences raising twins. Eddie Thompson, the retired banker turned diner owner, offered business advice and grandfather-like support. Jenny, the college student who worked morning shifts, became like a younger sister, helping Michelle prepare the apartment for the babies. Michelle's business acumen couldn't stay dormant forever. Between serving customers, she began helping Rose streamline the cafe's operations. Simple suggestions about inventory management and scheduling led to noticeable improvements in profits. Rose's grateful smile held a knowing look. She'd recognized Michelle's potential from the start. The twins grew steadily, their movements a constant reminder of her purpose. Michelle documented everything in a journal, writing letters to her unborn children about their father's kind eyes and genuine laugh, about the love that had created them, even if that love hadn't been strong enough to weather Kimberly's storms. Each ultrasound photo joined her collection of precious memories, stored in a box alongside her wedding ring, and a single photo of Keith. Her children deserved to know their father's face, even if they might never know his embrace. Dr. Foster's concerned glances during appointments suggested he saw more than she revealed, but he never pressed for details. The apartment slowly transformed into a home. A pair of second-hand cribs, carefully restored with paint and love, stood ready. Handmade mobiles, crafted during quiet evenings, danced above them. Books filled shelves built by Tom, the cafe's maintenance man who'd appointed himself her protector. 6 months into her Chicago life, Michelle stood behind the cafe counter, serving lattes with one hand while the other rested on her growing belly. A customer commented on her obvious pregnancy, and for the first time Michelle smiled without pain when talking about her babies. This was her new reality, not the life she'd planned, but one she was building with determination and unexpected grace. The autumn air in Chicago carried a familiar crispness as Keith Warburton strode through Millennium Park, his designer coat and perfectly polished shoes marking him as an outsider in this more casual setting. 7 years of regret and emptiness had led him here, ostensibly for a business meeting, but his distracted gaze betrayed deeper preoccupations. Children's laughter echoed across the park, drawing his attention to the playground. He paused, watching families enjoy the afternoon sunshine, an ache growing in his chest for the life he'd surrendered to duty. Then he saw them, 2 boys, identical down to the last detail, their features hauntingly familiar. Time seemed to stop as Keith's mind processed what his eyes were telling him. The boys, around 6 or 7 years old, had his mother's aristocratic nose, his father's strong jaw, and most startlingly, his own distinctive smile. They were racing each other around the playground, their movements mirror images of his own childhood energy. His heart nearly stopped when he heard a voice he'd never forgotten call. "Oliver." "Time to go home." Michelle appeared from behind a bench, gathering the boys' scattered belongings. She looked different, stronger, more confident, but unmistakably the woman who had haunted his dreams for 7 years. Keith retreated behind a large oak tree, his hands trembling as he watched the scene unfold. Michelle knelt to help one of the boys tie his shoelace, her gentle movements and patient smile revealing years of practiced motherhood. The other boy hugged her spontaneously, and her laugh carried across the park, striking Keith like a physical blow. But the implications crashed over him like waves. Twins, his sons. The timing aligned perfectly with their separation. All these years, while he'd been drowning in guilt and regret in New York, his children had been growing up here in Chicago. The thought brought him to his knees, his back against the rough bark of the tree. Memories flooded back the night he'd forced Michelle to leave, the infertility diagnosis that his mother had used as ammunition, the countless unopened letters that Kimberly had probably intercepted. Each revelation was another knife in his heart, each piece fitting into a puzzle of manipulation and lies. He watched as Michelle gathered the boys' backpacks, noticing how they each took one of her hands naturally, their little family unit complete without him. Their chatter drifted across the park, something about homework and promises of hot chocolate, everyday moments he'd missed by the thousands. The boy's mannerisms were uncanny reflections of his own. One furrowed his brow in concentration, exactly as Keith did during board meetings. The other had his habit of running his hand through his hair when excited. These inherited gestures, so familiar yet witnessed for the first time, made his chest tight with emotion. Keith followed at a distance as they left the park, his meeting forgotten. They headed toward a small cafe several blocks away, the boy skipping ahead while Michelle called out careful warnings about staying close. The sign above the door read Bean Brew, a far cry from the elite establishments of his world. Through the cafe window, he watched Michelle don an apron, transforming from mother to business owner with practiced ease. The boys settled at a corner table with their homework, comfortable in what was clearly their daily routine. The casual warmth of the scene contrasted sharply with his own sterile existence in the Warburton mansion. Back in his hotel room that night, Keith paced relentlessly, his mind racing. The marriage his mother had arranged with Victoria felt more hollow than ever. Their daughter Haley, though loved, had never filled the void Michelle left. Now he understood why he had other children, unknown to him, growing up without their father. He pulled out his phone, scrolling through private investigator contacts, then stopped. What right did he have to disrupt their lives? Michelle had built something beautiful from the ashes of their relationship. The boys seemed happy, well-adjusted, loved. His presence would only complicate their world. Yet he couldn't walk away. Not again. Not knowing what he knew now. The weight of 7 years of missed firsts, first steps, first words, first days of school pressed down on him. The thought of missing any more moments felt unbearable. In the bathroom mirror, Keith barely recognized himself. The polished exterior of the Warburton heir had cracked, revealing the broken man beneath. His mother's careful manipulations, which he'd finally begun to see through, had cost him not just his love but his children, flesh of his flesh, carrying his features, his mannerisms, his blood. Kimberly Warburton sat in her private study. A stack of private investigator reports spread before her like playing cards in a high-stakes game. The photographs showed Michelle's cafe, her apartment, and most importantly, the twins. Even in grainy surveillance photos, their Warburton heritage was unmistakable. 7 years, she murmured, her manicured fingers tracing the outline of the boys in one photo. 7 years of our bloodline growing up in. Her distaste for Michelle's modest but respectable life was evident in every syllable. The investigator had been thorough, providing details about the boys' school records, medical history, and daily routines. What Kimberly didn't know was that Victoria had been watching her closely. Keith's wife had noticed the sudden increase in private meetings, the hushed phone calls, the way Kimberly scrutinized old family photos with renewed interest. Years of living under her mother-in-law's manipulation had taught Victoria to recognize the signs of approaching storms. Kimberly's plan began to take shape with characteristic precision. First, she contacted the family's long-standing legal team, exploring custody options. The Warburton name carried weight, even in Chicago's courts. Money, influence, and carefully crafted concerns about the children's best interests would pave the way. "These boys are Warburtons," she informed her lawyers, her tone leaving no room for discussion. "They deserve the advantages of their birthright." The legal team nodded, already drafting documents that would paint Michelle as an obstacle to the children's potential future. Victoria, however, had developed her own network of contacts over the years. Through them, she learned of Kimberly's legal maneuvers. In secret, she began transferring funds from her personal accounts to a lawyer in Chicago, one who specialized in protecting mothers' rights. Kimberly's next move was to arrange a chance meeting with Michelle's landlord. A substantial offer was made to purchase the building housing both the cafe and Michelle's apartment. The goal was clear: control the environment, create pressure points, force Michelle into a corner. What she didn't expect was for the landlord to warn Michelle. Years of being part of the cafe's community had created loyalty money couldn't buy. The landlord's warning gave Michelle precious time to prepare, though she didn't yet know the full scope of what was coming. Victoria, watching this unfold, made her own quiet preparations. She established a trust fund in Haley's name, structured in a way that could easily be modified to include the twins if necessary. It was her insurance policy against Kimberly's machinations, a way to ensure all the children would be protected. The turning point came when Kimberly received photos of the twins at their school sports day. Their natural leadership abilities, their grace under pressure, their obvious intelligence, all traits that marked them as true Warburtons in her eyes. She could no longer allow what she saw as her rightful heirs to grow up outside the family's influence. They should be at Riverside Prep, she declared, referring to the elite private school that had educated generations of Warburton men. They should be learning about their heritage, their responsibilities, their destiny. Each word was another brick in the wall she planned to build around the boys. Victoria witnessed Kimberly's growing obsession with mounting concern. She saw how her mother-in-law studied the boys' photos with the same calculating look she'd once directed at Keith, planning and plotting their lives before they could choose for themselves. Using her social connections, Kimberly began laying groundwork in Chicago's elite circles. Subtle rumors spread about a long-lost branch of the Warburton family, preparing the social landscape for the boys' eventual elevation to their rightful place. Meanwhile, Victoria secretly reached out to Michelle through a series of anonymous letters, warning her of Kimberly's intentions. She included copies of legal documents, proposed strategies, and most importantly, evidence of Kimberly's past manipulations, including the falsified infertility diagnosis. Kimberly's final preparation was to redecorate the mansion's east wing. 2 bedrooms were prepared with everything young boys should have: expensive toys, top-of-the-line computers, custom-made uniforms hanging in closets. It was a gilded cage, built with the same attention to detail she'd once used to trap Keith. As her plans neared completion, Kimberly arranged her travel to Chicago with the same precision she approached everything. Her private jet was scheduled, appointments with local power players were set, and a team of lawyers stood ready to execute her carefully crafted strategy. What she didn't realize was that her perfect plan had cracks in its foundation. Victoria's quiet resistance, the strength of Michelle's community, and most importantly, the bonds of love between mother and sons would prove stronger than any legal strategy or social manipulation. Dr. Andrew Foster stood at his office window, watching Keith Warburton exit the park across the street. 20 years of carefully maintained distance from his past crumbled in that moment. His younger brother hadn't changed much, the same determined stride, the same way of adjusting his tie when troubled, mannerisms that echoed their father. The photograph on Andrew's desk, usually hidden in a drawer, showed a younger version of himself in a Harvard graduation gown, standing beside a teenage Keith. It was the last photo taken before Kimberly had forced him to choose between the family empire and his dream of becoming a doctor. He'd chosen medicine, and that choice had cost him his family name and his relationship with his brother. Recognition had been immediate when Michelle first came to his clinic years ago, heavily pregnant and alone. The Warburton features were unmistakable in her ultrasound, the distinctive profile that had marked their family for generations. He'd maintained his professional distance, knowing that revealing his identity might only complicate her already fragile situation. Over the years, Andrew had watched the twins grow, seeing Keith's expressions in their smiles, their grandfather's determination in their eyes. Every checkup was a reminder of the family he'd left behind, but also confirmation that he'd made the right choice in protecting them from Kimberly's influence. Uncle Andy Carl's voice echoed through the clinic's hallway during their regular checkup. The title, given innocently and earned through years of care, carried a deeper truth than the boy could know. Andrew's hands trembled slightly as he checked Oliver's reflexes, noting how the boy's analytical gaze matched Keith's exactly. The decision to maintain his silence had grown harder with each passing year. He'd built a life here, respected doctor, trusted friend, surrogate uncle to the boys. Revealing his identity now could shatter the delicate balance Michelle had created, yet keeping the secret felt increasingly like betrayal. Michelle's trust in him had been hard-won. He remembered her early days in Chicago, how she'd gradually opened up about her past, never knowing she was confiding in her former brother-in-law. Her strength in building a new life had earned his respect and strengthened his resolve to protect her from Kimberly's manipulations. The sight of Keith in the park changed everything. Andrew knew his brother's presence wasn't coincidental. Kimberly's influence cast long shadows. That evening, after his last patient, he sat in his office weighing his options. The framed medical license on his wall read Andrew Foster, MD, a constant reminder of the choice he'd made to forge his own path. His phone buzzed with a text from Michelle, asking if he'd join them for Sunday dinner, a weekly tradition that had become precious to him. These simple family moments, watching the boys grow, being part of their lives, felt like redemption for abandoning Keith all those years ago. The internal conflict raged as he drove to Michelle's apartment above the cafe. Each mile brought fresh waves of guilt for keeping secrets from Michelle, guilt for not reaching out to Keith, guilt for allowing Kimberly's influence to separate him from his brother in the first place. The boys greeted him with their usual enthusiasm, showing him their latest school projects. Andrew noticed how Oliver's scientific curiosity mirrored his own at that age, while Carl's leadership qualities reminded him of Keith before Kimberly's influence had taken hold. During dinner, Michelle mentioned seeing Keith in the park, her voice carefully neutral. Andrew's fork paused midway to his mouth as she described her former husband's presence in Chicago. The boys, unaware of the tension, continued their animated discussion about their upcoming school play. Later, after the twins were asleep, Michelle confided her fears about Keith's appearance in Chicago. Andrew listened, his heart heavy with unspoken truths. He wanted to tell her everything about his true identity, about growing up with Keith, about understanding Kimberly's manipulation tactics firsthand. Instead, he offered practical advice about protecting her legal rights, knowing his medical reputation in the community could provide additional support if needed. Each word of counsel was colored by his intimate knowledge of the Warburton family dynamics, though he had to pretend his insights were merely professional observation. That night, unable to sleep, Andrew pulled out an old journal. Its pages contained letters he'd written to Keith over the years but never sent, explaining his choices, expressing regret for leaving his brother to face Kimberly alone, sharing his pride in becoming a doctor. The latest entry would be the hardest: his discovery of Keith's sons and his decision to protect them. Being Brew transformed from a struggling neighborhood cafe into a thriving community hub under Michelle's careful guidance. What started as a simple coffee shop became a testament to resilience and smart business acumen. The worn linoleum floors were replaced with warm hardwood, mismatched chairs gave way to comfortable seating, and the aroma of artisanal coffee blends replaced instant coffee's bitter scent. Michelle's Harvard business training emerged in subtle ways. She implemented inventory systems that reduced waste by 40%, created employee schedules that maximized efficiency while respecting personal lives, and introduced a loyalty program that turned casual customers into regulars. Each change was calculated yet carried out with genuine care for the community. The cafe's transformation reflected Michelle's own evolution. Gone was the uncertain woman who'd arrived in Chicago with nothing but a suitcase and unborn twins. In her place stood a confident business owner who greeted customers by name and handled suppliers with skilled negotiation. Her twins, Carl and Oliver, grew up watching their mother build something from nothing. Mom's superhuman Carl once declared proudly to a customer while helping wipe tables after school. Oliver, more analytical, would add up the day's receipts, showing the same head for numbers that had gotten his mother through Harvard. The boys became part of the cafe's charm, their presence adding to its family-friendly atmosphere. The community rallied around Michelle's vision. Local artists displayed their work on the cafe's walls, creating an ever-changing gallery that drew art lovers from across the city. Weekend music performances by neighborhood musicians filled the space with everything from jazz to classical guitar. The cafe became more than a business, it became a cultural cornerstone. The former owner watched with pride as her protégé exceeded all expectations. "I knew you had it in you," she'd say, visiting during busy morning rushes to help out when needed. The older woman's faith in Michelle had been the first stepping stone to rebuilding her confidence. Financial success came gradually but steadily. Michelle reinvested profits wisely, expanding the kitchen to offer fresh baked goods, adding outdoor seating for summer months, and creating a small play area where children could safely entertain themselves while parents enjoyed their coffee. The cafe's reputation grew beyond the neighborhood. Food blogs featured their unique blend of community atmosphere and quality offerings. Local business magazines highlighted Michelle's success story, though she carefully avoided mentioning her Warburton connection. The cafe became a case study in how to build a business that served its community while maintaining profitability. Regular customers became extended family. Sarah Chen's flower shop provided fresh arrangements for the tables at wholesale prices. Eddie Thompson's financial expertise helped Michelle secure a small business loan for renovations. Jenny, the college student who'd started as a part-time barista, grew into a capable manager. Michelle's approach to business reflected her personal values. She offered health insurance to full-time employees, implemented a profit-sharing program, and created a scholarship fund for local students. These decisions sometimes meant smaller profits, but they built unwavering loyalty among staff and customers alike. The twins grew alongside the business, learning valuable lessons about hard work and community. They did homework at the corner table, helped with age-appropriate tasks, and absorbed their mother's business acumen through osmosis. Their presence reminded everyone that Being Brew was, at its heart, a family endeavor. Michelle's success caught the attention of local business organizations. She was invited to speak at Chamber of Commerce meetings, mentor other small business owners, and participate in community development initiatives. Each opportunity helped her build a network that would prove invaluable when facing future challenges. The cafe's second floor, once her tiny apartment, was converted into a community space for local meetings, book clubs, and study groups. Michelle and the twins moved to a modest but comfortable 3-bedroom apartment nearby, a testament to their improving circumstances. Dr. Andrew Foster, watching this transformation through regular visits, saw not just business success but personal healing. Michelle had turned her pain into purpose, her setbacks into stepping stones. The strength that had helped her survive those early days now helped others build their dreams. Bean Brew's 5th anniversary celebration became a neighborhood event. Streets were closed for outdoor seating, local vendors set up stalls, and customers shared stories of how the cafe had impacted their lives. Michelle stood in the midst of it all, her twins beside her, finally allowing herself to feel proud of what she'd built. In the opulent halls of the Warburton mansion, Keith's life unraveled with the quiet precision of a finely crafted timepiece. His marriage to Victoria, arranged by Kimberly with the same care she might select a business merger, had produced a daughter, Hayley, but little genuine connection. Each morning he would pass the family portraits in the grand hallway, generations of Warburtons staring down at him with painted disappointment. The cracks in his facade began showing during board meetings. His once steady hands would tremble slightly when signing documents. Dark circles appeared under his eyes, poorly concealed by expensive concealer suggested by his mother. The corporate titan that Kimberly had molded was slowly crumbling from within. Victoria noticed the changes first. She would find him in his study late at night, staring at old photographs hidden in his desk drawer. Sometimes she'd catch him watching videos of children playing in the park near their Manhattan home, his eyes filled with a longing she couldn't or wouldn't acknowledge. "Is this what you wanted?" Victoria asked one evening, her voice carrying across the formal dining room where they sat at opposite ends of a massive mahogany table. "This life, this marriage?" The questions hung in the air like crystal chandelier drops, delicate but sharp. Keith couldn't answer, his silence more telling than any words. Hayley, their daughter, became the only bright spot in their carefully orchestrated life. Yet even his relationship with her was tainted by Kimberly's constant interference. "She needs proper guidance," his mother would insist, scheduling endless etiquette lessons and social engagements for a child who just wanted to play with her dolls. The weight of his mother's manipulation became increasingly apparent. Each morning meeting, each charity gala, each carefully selected social engagement felt like another link in a chain he'd allowed to be forged around his neck. The realization that he'd sacrificed true love for this gilded prison ate at him like acid. Business success, once his refuge, now felt hollow. The Warburton empire continued to grow under his leadership, but each acquisition, each profitable quarter, each congratulatory handshake left him feeling more empty. He began questioning decisions he'd previously accepted without thought, seeing his mother's influence in every policy and partnership. Victoria's attempts to connect with him fell flat. Their conversations became exercises in careful avoidance, dancing around the elephant in the room, their mutual awareness that their marriage was a carefully constructed facade. She would catch him looking at their daughter with a strange mix of love and regret, as if seeing shadows of another life, other children, in Hayley's features. The breaking point came during a routine Sunday brunch, where Kimberly was critiquing Hayley's posture for the 100th time. Keith watched his daughter's shoulders slump under his mother's criticism, and suddenly saw his own childhood reflected in her eyes. The pattern of manipulation that had shaped his life was now threatening to mold another generation. His search for redemption began quietly. Late nights at the office became opportunities to investigate his mother's past actions. He discovered altered documents, intercepted letters, and a pattern of interference that stretched back decades. Each revelation was another crack in the foundation of his worldview. The discovery of Michelle's pregnancy test results, the real ones, showing perfect fertility hidden in his mother's personal files, sent him into a spiral of self-loathing. The realization that he'd been manipulated into abandoning not just his wife but his unborn children transformed his quiet desperation into barely contained rage. Victoria found him one night, surrounded by old papers in his study, tears streaming down his face as he held medical records proving his mother's deception. Instead of the confrontation he expected, she sat beside him in silence, finally understanding the full scope of Kimberly's manipulation of them both. Attempts to address these discoveries with his mother were met with smooth deflections and careful rewriting of history. "Everything I did was for the family," Kimberly would say, her voice carrying the same conviction that had shaped his entire life. But now he could see the steel beneath the silk, the manipulation behind the motherly concern. His performance at work began to suffer noticeably. Board members whispered about his distraction, his sudden questioning of long-standing company policies. The perfect corporate prince his mother had crafted was showing dangerous signs of independent thought. The final straw came when he overheard Kimberly planning Haley's entire future, which boarding school she would attend, which families would be appropriate for future marriage prospects, which role she would play in the company. The echo of his own carefully managed life in his daughter's planned future became unbearable. Carl and Oliver Warburton might have grown up without their father's name, but they inherited more than just his features. At 7 years old, the twins displayed a remarkable combination of their parents' best qualities, Michelle's resilience and Keith's natural leadership, creating a unique dynamic that captured the attention of everyone around them. Carl, older by 12 minutes, emerged as the more outgoing of the pair. His ability to connect with customers at the cafe was remarkable for his age. He'd greet regulars by name, remember their usual orders, and charm them with stories told with his father's exact mannerisms, though he didn't know it. During the cafe's busy hours, he'd help clear tables, proudly wearing a miniature apron his mother had made him. Oliver, more reserved and analytical, showed an uncanny head for numbers that mirrored both his parents' business acumen. He would sit at the corner table after school, meticulously counting the day's receipts or suggesting improvements to the cafe's inventory system. His thoughtful observations often left adults amazed at his maturity. Dr. Andrew Foster watched the boys develop with a mixture of pride and melancholy, seeing shadows of his own childhood with Keith in their interactions. During their regular checkups, he noticed how they complemented each other, Carl distracting Oliver with jokes during vaccinations, Oliver calming his brother's occasional impetuousness with quiet logic. The questions about their father began gradually. At first they were simple: "Why don't we have a dad like Tommy from school?" Michelle would answer carefully, telling them about the love that created them, while carefully avoiding the pain that followed. Andrew, present for many of these conversations, would add reassuring words about different kinds of families. But their bond with Andrew grew naturally over the years. Sunday dinners became a tradition, with the boys looking forward to Uncle Andy's visits. He taught them to play chess, helped with science projects, and provided the male guidance Michelle couldn't give. What none of them knew was how much these moments meant to Andrew, allowing him to partially heal the wound of losing his relationship with Keith. School became a showcase for their inherited talents. Carl's natural charm made him a favorite among teachers and students alike. His ability to mediate playground disputes showed leadership skills that would have made any Warburton proud. Oliver's academic excellence, particularly in mathematics and science, reflected the sharp business mind that had built their grandfather's empire. Together, they formed an inseparable unit. Where Carl's enthusiasm might have led to reckless decisions, Oliver's caution created balance. When Oliver's perfectionism threatened to overwhelm him, Carl's light-hearted perspective would ease his brother's stress. Their different personalities created a perfect harmony that made them stronger together. The cafe became their second classroom. They learned business basics by watching their mother, absorbed lessons about community by interacting with customers, and developed work ethic through age-appropriate tasks. Regular customers often commented on how the twins added to the cafe's family atmosphere, their presence making the space feel more welcoming. Andrew observed their development with professional and personal interest. During regular health checkups, he noted how they carried themselves with the same natural grace he remembered in young Keith. Their questions became more probing as they grew older, showing curiosity about their heritage that both worried and touched Michelle. The boys' bond extended beyond typical twin connection. They developed their own language of subtle gestures and shared glances, communicating silently in ways that reminded Andrew of his childhood secret codes with Keith. During busy cafe hours, they would wordlessly coordinate their actions, one restocking while the other cleaned, moving in perfect synchronization. Their relationship with their mother was equally remarkable. They seemed to sense when Michelle needed support, offering hugs or small gestures of help without being asked. On difficult days, they would work extra hard at their chores, understanding instinctively that their mother carried heavy burdens alone. As they approached their 8th birthday, their questions about family became more specific. "Mom, why do we look different from you?" Oliver asked one evening, his analytical mind noting genetic traits he couldn't understand. Carl added, "Tommy says we must look like our dad." These moments would leave Michelle struggling to balance truth with protection. Andrew watched this dynamic unfold with growing concern. His medical training told him children needed truth, but his personal knowledge of the Warburton family made him understand Michelle's caution. He became a buffer, helping explain family dynamics in age-appropriate ways while supporting Michelle's decisions about how much to reveal. The twins' unique bond and their growing curiosity about their identity would soon play a crucial role in the events to come, as their inherent Warburton traits drew them inevitably closer to the truth of their heritage. The storm that had been brewing finally broke on a quiet Tuesday morning. Michelle was preparing for the morning rush when a courier delivered an envelope bearing the letterhead of Preston Associates, the Warburtons' longtime legal firm. Her hands trembled as she read the carefully worded threats disguised as concerns about the twins' welfare and educational opportunities. Kimberly Warburton's opening move was calculated and precise. The legal document outlined grave concerns about the boys' living conditions, their education, and their lack of access to their rightful heritage. Each paragraph was crafted to undermine Michelle's confidence while presenting Kimberly as a concerned grandmother acting in the children's best interests. The cafe's regular customers noticed something was wrong when Michelle emerged from the back office, her face pale but determined. Eddie Thompson, the retired banker, immediately recognized the legal letterhead. "Don't face this alone," he advised, already reaching for his phone to contact his own attorney. Kimberly's next move came in the form of a generous offer, a substantial sum to surrender custody of the twins, presented by a smooth-talking lawyer in an expensive suit. The figure was enough to set Michelle up comfortably for life, but the cost was unthinkable. "My children are not for sale," she declared, her voice steady despite her racing heart. The community's response was immediate and overwhelming. Sarah Chen, the florist, organized a neighborhood watch when suspicious cars started appearing outside the cafe. Tom, the maintenance man, installed additional security cameras free of charge. Jenny, now the cafe's manager, rearranged schedules so Michelle would never have to work alone. Kimberly escalated by attempting to buy the building housing both the cafe and Michelle's apartment. The offer to the landlord was substantially above market value, a move designed to force Michelle out of her business and home simultaneously. What Kimberly hadn't counted on was the landlord's loyalty to the community Michelle had helped build. Mrs. Warburton, the landlord, had said, "Some things are worth more than money." His refusal to sell triggered Kimberly's more aggressive tactics. Health inspectors suddenly appeared with increasing frequency. Minor building code violations were reported anonymously. Each attack was met with community resistance and support. Local business owners rallied around Michelle. The hardware store provided materials to address the cited violations. A contractor who frequented the cafe handled repairs at cost. The local press, sensing a story, began asking questions about the sudden interest in a successful small business. The twins, though shielded from the worst of it, sensed the tension. Carl became more protective of his brother and mother, while Oliver's analytical mind worked overtime trying to understand the changes around them. Their questions became harder to answer. "Mom, why are those men watching our cafe?" Dr. Andrew Foster increased his presence, his medical credentials and community standing providing an additional layer of protection. His detailed records of the boys' health and development would prove crucial in countering any claims about their welfare. But he carried his own burden, knowing the full scope of what Kimberly was capable of from personal experience. The pressure peaked when Kimberly arranged a chance meeting with the twins during their walk home from school. Her attempt to introduce herself as their grandmother was thwarted by Sarah Chen, who happened to be delivering flowers nearby. The incident left Michelle shaken but more determined than ever to protect her children. The cafe became a symbol of resistance. Regular customers increased their visits, making sure tables were always full. Local lawyers offered pro bono advice. The community's message was clear, Michelle, and the twins weren't facing this alone. A turning point came when Rose Martinez, now retired, shared her own story of fighting to keep her business against corporate takeover attempts. Her experience helped Michelle develop strategies to protect both the cafe and her children. "They think money is power," Rose said, "but community is stronger." Victoria's anonymous support arrived in carefully timed ways, legal precedents that could help Michelle's case, warnings about Kimberly's next moves, and most importantly, evidence of past manipulation that could prove crucial in court. Her inside knowledge became a powerful weapon in Michelle's arsenal. As pressure mounted, Michelle found strength she didn't know she possessed. Each attack reinforced her determination to protect her children and the life they'd built. The cafe's success had given her financial stability, but the community's support gave her the courage to stand against the Warburton machine. Victoria Warburton sat in her private study at midnight, surrounded by documents that shattered everything she'd believed about her marriage. The discovery had started innocently. A misplaced key had opened Kimberly's private filing cabinet, revealing decades of carefully orchestrated manipulations, including the truth about Michelle's infertility. The medical records were damning. Dr. Stone's original report showed Michelle was perfectly capable of bearing children, while the falsified version Kimberly had presented told a different story. Victoria's hands trembled as she uncovered more evidence: intercepted letters from Michelle announcing her pregnancy, manipulated test results, and carefully documented plans to separate Keith from his first wife. Her own marriage to Keith suddenly appeared in a new light. Every coincidental meeting, every carefully arranged dinner, every subtle push from Kimberly had been part of a grand design. Even her daughter Haley's birth had been turned into a disappointment because she wasn't the male heir Kimberly demanded. The decision to help Michelle came naturally, though it had to be handled with extreme caution. Victoria began by creating an anonymous email account, sending carefully worded warnings about Kimberly's plans. Each message included proof of past manipulations, legal precedents that could help, and strategic advice based on her insider knowledge. Her position as Keith's wife gave her access to Kimberly's inner circle. She attended charity functions and board meetings, gathering intelligence that she carefully passed to Michelle through secure channels. Every dinner conversation became an opportunity to glean information about Kimberly's next moves. The risk of discovery was constant. Victoria maintained her perfect society wife facade while secretly working to undermine Kimberly's plans. She arranged for trusted lawyers to take Michelle's case, funneling money through complex channels to ensure the paper trail couldn't lead back to her. The turning point came when she discovered Kimberly's plans to use Haley as a pawn. Documents outlined how her daughter would be sent to boarding school, removing potential complications when the twins were brought into the family. The thought of her child being manipulated like Keith became the final straw. Confronting Keith proved more complicated than she'd imagined. Finding him in his study late one night, Victoria placed the evidence of his mother's manipulation on his desk. "Your sons," she said simply, watching his face as realization dawned. She knew about them from the beginning. Keith's response was a mixture of anger and devastation. Years of carefully constructed reality crumbled as Victoria methodically presented proof of his mother's interference. The falsified medical reports, the hidden letters, the calculated separation, each revelation struck like a physical blow. "Why are you showing me this now?" Keith asked, his voice hoarse with emotion. Victoria's answer was simple: because our daughter deserves better than to be another piece in Kimberly's game. And because those boys deserve to know their father, the real you, not the one your mother created. Their conversation lasted through the night, shifting from accusations to understanding as they realized they were both victims of Kimberly's manipulations. Victoria shared her secret support of Michelle, expecting anger but finding relief in Keith's gratitude. Together, they began planning. Victoria's knowledge of Kimberly's methods combined with Keith's resources could provide Michelle with the protection she needed. But first, they had to address their own failing marriage and the future of their daughter. "I've been helping Michelle protect your sons," Victoria admitted. "Now we need to protect Haley from becoming what your mother wanted you to be." The truth hung between them. Their marriage had been built on Kimberly's manipulation, but their shared understanding could help them forge a different kind of partnership. The confrontation with Kimberly was inevitable. Victoria stood beside Keith as he finally faced his mother, armed with undeniable evidence of her manipulation. Kimberly's carefully maintained composure cracked as she realized her daughter-in-law had been working against her all along. "Everything I did was for this family," Kimberly insisted, but her words fell flat against the weight of evidence Victoria had accumulated. The dynasty she'd fought so hard to control was slipping through her fingers, undone by the very determination to maintain power that had driven her actions. The moment of truth arrived on a quiet Sunday evening at Bean Brew after closing time. Andrew Foster sat across from Michelle, the weight of 20 years of secrets evident in his tired eyes. The twins were upstairs doing homework, their muffled laughter filtering down through the old building's floors. "There's something I need to tell you," Andrew began, his fingers tracing the rim of his coffee cup. "My real name isn't Foster." He pulled out an old photograph from his wallet, a graduation picture, showing a younger version of himself standing next to Keith at Harvard. "It's Warburton. I'm Keith's older brother." Michelle's coffee cup clattered against its saucer as the implications hit her. Years of friendship, medical care, Sunday dinners, all colored by this hidden connection. Her mind raced through countless interactions, seeing them in a new light. The twins' comfortable relationship with their Uncle Andy took on new meaning. "I left the family 20 years ago," Andrew continued, his voice steady despite his obvious emotion. "Kimberly gave me an ultimatum: the family business or medical school. I chose medicine, and she made sure I disappeared from family records." Each word carried the weight of decades of silence. The cafe's familiar surroundings felt suddenly foreign to Michelle as she processed this revelation. "All these years," she whispered, "you knew who I was." Who the boys were, her voice trembled between anger and confusion. The man she'd trusted with her children's health, who'd become family, had kept this fundamental truth hidden. Andrew's explanation came in careful measures. He described watching Keith grow up under Kimberly's influence, his own escape from the family's golden cage, and the guilt of leaving his younger brother to face their mother alone. "When you came to my clinic pregnant and alone, I knew I had to protect you from what I'd escaped." The twins chose that moment to come downstairs, asking about dessert. They stopped at the bottom of the stairs, sensing the tension in the room. In their faces, Andrew saw Keith's features more clearly than ever, the same questioning look their father had worn in childhood moments of uncertainty. "Go back upstairs, boys," Michelle said softly, her maternal instinct to protect overriding her own emotional turmoil. Once they were gone, she turned back to Andrew. "Does Keith know you're here, that you've been part of our lives?" Andrew shook his head. "Keith thinks I'm practicing medicine somewhere in Europe. It's what Kimberly told him after I left." His voice carried years of regret. "I've watched my nephews grow up from a distance, unable to claim them, just as Keith has." The revelation sparked a complex mix of emotions in Michelle. Anger at the deception warred with understanding of Andrew's impossible position. The support he'd provided over the years, medical care, emotional guidance, male influence for the twins, took on new significance. "I saw Keith that day in the park," Andrew admitted. I knew it would change everything. That's why I'm telling you now. You need to understand the full scope of what we're dealing with." He proceeded to explain Kimberly's patterns of manipulation, how she'd separated him from Keith, and how she'd likely used similar tactics regarding the twins. Michelle listened, her business mind processing the strategic implications while her heart grappled with the personal impact. "The boys," she said finally, "they deserve to know their family history, all of it, but on our terms, not Kimberly's." Andrew reached across the table, hesitating before taking Michelle's hand. "I never meant to deceive you. Everything I've done to care for the boys, our friendship, it's all been real. Being part of their lives, even in this limited way, has been my way of trying to make up for not protecting Keith." As they talked through the night, a new understanding emerged. Andrew's medical reputation and community standing could provide additional protection against Kimberly's legal threats. His insider knowledge of Warburton family dynamics could help prepare for the battles ahead. The next Sunday dinner carried new meaning. Watching the twins interact with their uncle, their real uncle, Michelle saw small gestures and expressions that spoke of shared blood. The family they'd built, unconventional as it was, had been real despite the secrets. The crisis began on an ordinary Tuesday morning. Oliver complained of a headache before school, but Michelle attributed it to late-night studying. By afternoon, the school nurse called Oliver had collapsed during math class, his temperature soaring to dangerous levels. At Chicago Memorial Hospital, Dr. Andrew Foster received the emergency call and rushed to the pediatric ward, his professional demeanor barely masking his personal concern. Oliver lay pale against white hospital sheets, his usual analytical expression replaced by pain and confusion. Carl sat beside his twin, refusing to leave despite the nurse's gentle attempts to separate them. The diagnosis hit like a physical blow: severe bacterial infection requiring immediate intensive treatment. Michelle stood frozen as Andrew explained the medical terminology, her mind fixating on one devastating detail: the treatment wasn't fully covered by her insurance. The estimated costs would exceed $200,000. "Mom, I'm scared," Oliver whispered during a brief moment of lucidity, his hand gripping hers with surprising strength. Carl, unusually quiet, held his brother's other hand, their twin bond more evident than ever. Michelle fought to maintain her composure, promising everything would be fine while her mind raced through impossible calculations. The cafe's savings, meant for college funds, disappeared into the first round of treatments. Michelle worked double shifts, leaving Carl with Sarah Chen while rushing between the hospital and cafe. The sight of Oliver's empty chair at the corner table became a painful reminder of their precarious situation. News spread quickly through the tight-knit community. Rose Martinez, now retired, returned to help manage the cafe, refusing any payment. Regular customers left extra-large tips, quietly understanding they were contributing to Oliver's medical fund. Jenny organized the staff to work additional hours, ensuring the business stayed afloat while Michelle focused on her son. Andrew, straddling the line between doctor and family, pulled every professional favor he could. He convinced specialists to reduce their fees, arranged payment plans, and spent nights reviewing Oliver's case for more affordable treatment options. His medical expertise became their lifeline, though the weight of his secret identity grew heavier. The turning point came when Eddie Thompson overheard Michelle on the phone with the hospital's billing department. The retired banker immediately called an emergency meeting of local business owners. Within hours, the community mobilized. Sarah Chen's flower shop became donation headquarters. The hardware store owner organized a benefit auction. Local restaurants pledged percentages of their daily profits. Carl showed strength beyond his years, dividing his time between helping at the cafe and supporting his brother. Customers would find him managing the register or delivering orders, his father's determination evident in every movement. "Oliver needs me to be strong," he explained to concerned patrons, sounding far older than his 8 years. The fundraising campaign gained unexpected momentum, when a local news station covered the story. They captured the community's efforts to save a child they'd watched grow up in their neighborhood cafe. The reporter, touched by Carl's devotion to his twin, produced a segment that brought tears to viewers' eyes. Michelle's pride battled with necessity as donations poured in. Each contribution came with stories how Oliver had helped someone's child with math homework, how the twins had made their cafe feel like home, how their family had contributed to the community's fabric. These weren't handouts, they were investments in a family that had invested in them. Andrew watched the community's response with mixed emotions. His position at the hospital could have easily covered the medical bills, but revealing his Warburton connection now might cause more harm than good. Instead, he quietly matched every donation anonymously, his way of supporting his nephew without exposing their relationship. As Oliver's condition slowly improved, the financial pressure remained crushing. Michelle sold her car, pawned her jewelry, everything except her wedding ring, which she kept locked away as the twins' inheritance. Each sacrifice was made without hesitation, her only focus being her son's recovery. The stress began showing in Michelle's face, despite her attempts to stay strong. Late at night, after Carl had finally fallen asleep in the hospital chair, she would stand at Oliver's window, remembering the days when her biggest worry was Harvard tuition. Those memories felt like another lifetime. The confrontation that had been brewing for years finally erupted in the hospital's private waiting room. Kimberly Warburton arrived unannounced, her designer heels clicking against sterile floors, armed with legal documents and a sense of righteous entitlement. The sight of her grandson in a hospital bed had presented what she saw as the perfect opportunity to seize control. "This proves my point entirely," Kimberly announced, waving papers at Michelle. "The boys need proper medical care, the kind only Warburton Resources can provide." Her voice carried the same authoritative tone that had controlled Keith's life, but Michelle was no longer the vulnerable woman who had left the mansion 7 years ago. Keith arrived moments later, having learned of Oliver's condition through Victoria's careful monitoring. The sight of his son in a hospital bed, pale and connected to machines, shattered whatever remained of his carefully maintained composure. "Enough, Mother," he said, his voice breaking. "This has to stop." Victoria stood in the doorway, Haley clutching her hand, watching the scene unfold. The little girl's presence served as a stark reminder of what was at stake, another generation at risk of Kimberly's manipulation. Andrew, monitoring Oliver's vitals, finally stepped forward, ready to reveal his true identity. "Hello, Mother," Andrew said quietly, removing his doctor's coat to face Kimberly. The color drained from her face as she recognized the son she'd banished 2 decades ago. Keith staggered back, his world tilting on its axis as he realized his trusted brother had been here all along. The truth spilled out in harsh waves. Victoria produced the evidence she'd gathered: years of manipulated medical records, intercepted letters, and orchestrated separations. Each revelation hit Kimberly like a physical blow, her carefully constructed world of control crumbling around her. "Everything I did was for this family," Kimberly insisted, but her words rang hollow in the hospital room. Keith's response was devastating in its simplicity. "No, Mother. Everything you did was for control. And look what it's cost us, all of us." Carl, who had been quietly watching from Oliver's bedside, spoke up with childhood clarity. "Is that why we didn't have a dad? Because you wanted to control everything?" His question, innocent yet piercing, laid bare the human cost of Kimberly's machinations. The confrontation reached its peak when medical bills fell from Michelle's bag, spreading across the floor like accusations. The community's fundraising efforts, the cafe's struggled survival, all while Warburton millions sat in bank accounts. The contrast was stark and damning. Victoria chose this moment to make her stand. "I'm leaving," she announced, her voice steady. "I won't let Haley grow up in this toxic environment. I won't let her become another pawn in your games." Keith, seeing his daughter's fearful expression, realized he had to choose between his mother's approval and his children's welfare. Kimberly's facade finally cracked. "You can't leave," she commanded, but her voice had lost its power. This family needs healing," Andrew interrupted, speaking with the authority of both a doctor and a son. "And that can't happen until you step back." The sight of Oliver stirring in his hospital bed shifted everyone's focus. The boy's weak voice, asking for his mother, cut through the tension, reminding them all of what truly mattered. Michelle moved to her son's side, her protective instinct stronger than any legal threat. Keith watched this scene, Michelle's gentle care, Carl's unwavering support, Andrew's medical expertise, Victoria's quiet strength, and made his decision. "Mother," he said firmly, "leave. Leave now, or I'll make public everything Victoria has uncovered." Kimberly looked around the room, seeing no allies in the faces before her. Her perfectly maintained appearance seemed to crack, showing the frightened woman beneath who had spent decades building walls of control out of her own insecurities. As she left, her heels no longer clicking with confidence, Victoria gathered Haley closer. "We'll be in Los Angeles," she told Keith softly. "When you're ready to be the father our daughter needs, you'll know where to find us." Her departure was quiet but final, marking the end of another chapter in the Warburton saga. The aftermath of the hospital confrontation left emotional debris scattered like shrapnel. Michelle stood in Bean Brew's empty kitchen at 3 a.m., surrounded by unpaid bills and hospital paperwork, her hands trembling as she counted the day's meager earnings. The weight of everything: Oliver's illness, Keith's reappearance, Andrew's revelation, the community's generosity that couldn't quite bridge the financial gap, finally became too much. Her legs gave way, and she slid down against the industrial refrigerator, years of carefully maintained strength crumbling in the pre-dawn darkness. The sound of her breakdown was muffled by the hum of kitchen equipment, her sobs echoing in the empty cafe where she'd built her second chance at life. Andrew found her there, having stopped by on his way home from his hospital shift. Without a word, he sat beside her on the cold kitchen floor, his doctor's coat still smelling of antiseptic. The silence between them was heavy with unspoken truths and shared pain. "I can't do this anymore," Michelle whispered, her voice raw. "I've tried to be strong for them, to build something stable, but it's all falling apart." The confession cost her dearly, admitting weakness had never been part of her survival strategy. The twins, meanwhile, were showing signs of their own trauma. Carl had become hyper-vigilant, trying to fill roles no 8-year-old should bear. He'd taken to sleeping in Oliver's hospital room, monitoring his brother's breathing, as if his presence alone could prevent further crisis. Oliver, usually the analytical one, had retreated into uncharacteristic silence. The discovery that their father had been nearby, that their trusted doctor was their uncle, that a grandmother they'd never known had tried to separate them, it was too much for his methodical mind to process. "I hear them crying at night," Michelle confessed to Andrew. "Carl thinks I don't know, but he sits with Oliver and they whisper about why their father left, why everyone seems to have secrets. They're trying to understand things that even adults can't make sense of." Andrew's steady presence became their anchor. His medical expertise helped Oliver's physical recovery, while his understanding of the Warburton family dynamics helped him guide the twins through their emotional turbulence. But watching his nephews struggle with their identity brought back painful memories of his own exile. The cafe's community noticed the change in their beloved family. Regular customers would find Michelle staring into space, coffee pot frozen mid-pour, lost in thoughts too heavy to bear. The twins' usual cheerful presence was replaced by quiet uncertainty, their innocent questions about family now carrying deeper wounds. Sarah Chen found Michelle one morning, attempting to open the cafe despite running a fever and severe exhaustion. Enough, the older woman declared, taking the keys and calling Dr. Foster. The community rallied once again, this time to force Michelle to rest, to accept help, to acknowledge she couldn't carry everything alone. The breaking point came during a quiet evening, when Carl asked the question Michelle had dreaded: "Mom, if Uncle Andy is Dad's brother, and he loved us all this time, Does that mean Dad didn't want to love us? The innocence of the question, the hurt behind it, shattered what remained of Michelle's composure. Andrew stepped in, gathering both boys close. Your father, he began carefully, was like me, once trapped in a cage made of expectations and fear. The difference is, I found the courage to leave, while he stayed until the cage became all he knew. His words, meant for children, carried wisdom that touched everyone in the room. Oliver's recovery was gradual, marked by small victories and setbacks. Each step forward seemed accompanied by new revelations about their family's complicated past. The boys' resilience was tested as they tried to reconcile their simple, loving cafe life with the complex web of Warburton family dynamics. Michelle found herself at a crossroads. The strength that had carried her through 7 years of single motherhood, building a business, creating a life from nothing, it felt depleted. Yet in this moment of complete vulnerability, she discovered something unexpected. Letting others help didn't mean she had failed. The truth emerged from a forgotten safe in the Warburton Mansion's library, its contents undisturbed for 7 years. Victoria had discovered the combination while organizing Kimberly's papers during Oliver's hospitalization. Inside, carefully bundled and dated, lay every letter Michelle had sent to Keith during those first crucial months. The first letter, dated just days after her departure, was tear-stained but resolute. Keith, I'm pregnant. Despite what your mother claims, despite the lies about infertility, I'm carrying your child. The paper was creased from repeated folding, as if Kimberly had read it multiple times before hiding it away. More letters followed, each chronicling a different stage of Michelle's pregnancy. Ultrasound photos showing twins, medical reports confirming their health, even a handwritten note about their first movements. Each piece of correspondence had been systematically intercepted, creating a paper trail of deliberate separation. Victoria brought the evidence to Keith's office late one evening, laying out the timeline of deception on his mahogany desk. Your mother didn't just separate you from Michelle, she explained softly. She kept you from knowing your sons existed. Keith's hands trembled as he read Michelle's words from 7 years ago. Her hope in those early letters, her belief that he would come once he knew about the pregnancy, gradually gave way to resignation and finally acceptance that she would face motherhood alone. A complete set, Victoria continued, revealing more documents. Dr. Stone's original fertility report showing Michelle was perfectly healthy. The falsified version your mother used. Bank records showing payments to the doctor. Everything carefully orchestrated to separate you from your family. The reality of his mother's manipulation struck Keith with physical force. Each document revealed another layer of calculated deceit. Medical records had been altered, phone messages intercepted. Even the household staff had been paid to maintain the illusion that Michelle had chosen to disappear. A photo fell from one of the letters. Michelle, at 7 months pregnant, her hand resting protectively over her swollen belly, her face showing both joy and sadness. On the back, she'd written, your sons already so much like you. I wish you could feel them kick. Victoria watched as Keith absorbed each revelation. There's more, she said quietly, producing a recording device. Your mother's conversations with Dr. Stone, planning the false infertility diagnosis. She kept records of everything, Keith. Her pride in her own manipulation was her downfall. The evidence painted a picture of calculated cruelty. Kimberly had tracked Michelle's pregnancy from afar, gathering information while ensuring Keith remained ignorant. She'd even documented Michelle's arrival in Chicago, but chose to wait years before making any moves to claim the twins. Keith's breakdown was quiet but complete. The carefully constructed worldview his mother had built around him crumbled as he read Michelle's desperate attempts to reach him. Each letter revealed not just what he'd lost, but how deliberately he'd been prevented from being a father. The final piece of evidence was perhaps the most damning: Kimberly's own detailed notes about her strategic family management. Her clinical descriptions of separating Keith from Michelle, her plans for eventually claiming the twins, even her contingencies for dealing with various scenarios, all meticulously documented with the same precision she applied to business dealings. Victoria had one last revelation. She's been watching them all along, Keith. She has files on every milestone, their first steps, first words, school records. She was building a case to take them from Michelle while making sure you never knew they existed. The weight of 7 years of lost fatherhood crashed down on Keith. Moments he could never reclaim, their birth, first smiles, first days of school, all stolen by his mother's manipulation. The reality that he had been living mere miles from his sons in Chicago, never knowing they were there, felt like a physical wound. In the quiet of Bean Brew after closing time, Andrew finally shared his full story with Keith and Michelle. The cafe, which had witnessed so many family moments, now hosted the unraveling of decades of secrets. The twins were asleep upstairs, their presence a reminder of what was at stake. "I was supposed to be the perfect heir," Andrew began, his fingers tracing the rim of his coffee cup. Firstborn son, Harvard education, groomed from birth to take over Warburton Industries. But I wanted to heal people, not manage their money. The bitterness in his voice spoke of old wounds still tender. Keith listened, stunned, as his brother described their mother's escalating attempts to force him into the family mold. First came the subtle manipulation, guilt about family duty, carefully arranged coincidences. That interfered with medical school applications, orchestrated situations designed to push him toward business. When subtlety failed, she became more direct, Andrew continued. She threatened to cut funding for my education, to blacklist me from medical schools, to ensure no hospital would hire me. But what broke me was her threat to do the same to you, Keith. She promised to destroy your dreams if I didn't disappear. The pattern emerged clearly. Kimberly's need for control hadn't started with Michelle. She'd been orchestrating family separations for decades, ensuring each generation bent to her will. Even their father's death, Andrew revealed, had been used as leverage to maintain her grip on power. Victoria, who had joined them, added her own pieces to the puzzle. She produced documents showing how Kimberly had systematically removed any family members who threatened her control. Cousins who asked too many questions about business practices found themselves disinherited. Aunts who tried to maintain contact with Andrew were cut off from family events. But the Warburton legacy isn't what we thought, Keith realized aloud. It's not about business success or social status, it's about fear. She's been using the family name to control everyone around her. His voice carried the weight of this understanding, years of manipulation suddenly clear. Michelle listened as Andrew described watching her pregnancy from afar, unable to reach out without risking Kimberly's retaliation. "I became your doctor because it was the only way I could protect you and the twins," he admitted. "I couldn't save Keith from her influence, but I could try to shield you." The true extent of Kimberly's control became apparent through Victoria's research. She had maintained detailed files on every family member, documenting weaknesses to exploit, relationships to manipulate, dreams to either nurture or crush, depending on how they served her purposes. "She doesn't love the family name," Victoria observed quietly. "She loves the power it gives her. The real Warburton legacy, the one in these old photographs before her time, was about innovation, creativity, and genuine care for others. She twisted it into something unrecognizable." Keith found himself looking at old family portraits with new eyes. The stern faces he'd always interpreted as dignified now seemed trapped, constrained by the same invisible chains that had bound him. Each generation had suffered under the weight of false expectations and manufactured duty. Andrew's voice softened as he spoke of their father, not the stern businessman of Keith's memories, but a man who used to sneak his sons into his study to read adventure stories, who dreamed of traveling but was held back by Kimberly's insistence on maintaining their social position. "The night I left," Andrew revealed, "Dad caught me packing. Instead of stopping me, he gave me his old medical bag from when he'd wanted to be a doctor himself. It was his way of saying someone should break free." The medical bag still sat in Andrew's office, a symbol of escaped dreams. The truth about Haley's birth added another layer to Kimberly's manipulation. Victoria shared how her daughter's arrival had been preceded by careful genetic screening, orchestrated by Kimberly without their knowledge, her disappointment at having a granddaughter rather than the male heir she'd wanted, leading to subtle but constant criticism. The path to reconciliation began in Bean Brew's kitchen, where so many family moments had unfolded. Keith stood awkwardly among the industrial appliances, watching Michelle close up for the night. The space between them held 7 years of pain, secrets, and missed opportunities. "I don't expect forgiveness," Keith began, his voice rough with emotion. "But I need you to know how deeply I regret letting my mother control our lives." His hands, once steady in billion-dollar negotiations, trembled as he placed a stack of letters on the counter, every letter Michelle had written during her pregnancy, finally delivered to their intended recipient. Michelle watched him through the familiar motions of wiping down counters and stacking chairs, her movements deliberate and measured. "It's not just about forgiveness, Keith," she replied softly. "It's about trust. It's about the life we could have had, the family we should have been." The twins' homework lay scattered on their usual corner table, math problems solved in Oliver's precise handwriting, Carl's creative writing assignment filled with adventure stories. These fragments of their daily life highlighted everything Keith had missed, every moment he could never reclaim. Andrew's presence became crucial to the healing process. As both doctor and brother, he helped bridge the gap between past and present. During family dinners, now tentatively including Keith, he would share stories of their childhood, helping the twins understand their father through the lens of happier times. Victoria's support proved unexpected but valuable. She began bringing Haley to the cafe, allowing the siblings to form their own bonds away from Kimberly's influence. The sight of all 3 children playing together, their laughter echoing through the cafe, offered a glimpse of what family could mean. The breakthrough came during Oliver's recovery. Keith spent nights at the hospital, learning to be a father through small moments, adjusting pillows, reading stories, simply being present. Carl would watch from the doorway, his protective instincts slowly giving way to curiosity about this man who shared his features. Michelle found herself monitoring these interactions with mixed emotions. The sight of Keith tenderly caring for their son, showing the gentle nature she'd fallen in love with years ago, stirred complicated feelings. "He's trying," Andrew observed quietly one evening. "Not just to make amends, but to become the man he could have been without her influence." The community, which had supported Michelle through everything, watched this reconciliation with cautious optimism. Rose Martinez, ever the wise observer, noted how the cafe seemed to breathe easier, as if the space itself welcomed the healing taking place within its walls. Keith's transformation was gradual but profound. He stepped away from active management of Warburton Industries, choosing instead to spend afternoons helping with homework or learning the cafe's operations. His corporate suits gave way to casual clothes, his practiced smile softening into genuine expressions of joy in his children's presence. The twins' acceptance came in stages. Oliver, analytical as ever, asked direct questions about the past, demanding honest answers. Carl's approach was more emotional, testing Keith's commitment through small challenges, attending school events, remembering preferences, being consistently present. Michelle's journey toward forgiveness was perhaps the most complex. Each step forward was accompanied by memories of darker times: the night she left, the lonely pregnancy, the years of struggling alone. Yet watching Keith with their children, seeing his genuine efforts to right past wrongs, slowly began to heal old wounds. "I'm not asking for what we had," Keith said one quiet evening, after the twins had gone to bed. "I'm asking for the chance to be the father they deserve, to support you in the amazing life you've built, to prove that I've learned from my mistakes." The healing extended beyond their immediate family. Victoria and Haley became regular fixtures at the cafe, bringing warmth and connection to every visit. Andrew stepped more fully into his role as uncle, no longer hiding behind his professional facade. Even some of the younger Warburton cousins, long estranged by Kimberly's manipulations, began reaching out. 1 year after the hospital confrontation, Bean Brew hosted a different kind of family gathering. Kimberly Warburton stood outside the cafe, her usual designer outfit replaced by simple elegance, clutching an envelope that contained her attempt at redemption. The cafe had transformed for a special Sunday brunch. Sunlight streamed through windows decorated with fresh flowers from Sarah Chen's shop. Regular customers mingled with Warburton relatives. The social barriers that had once seemed insurmountable now dissolved in the warmth of genuine connection. Kimberly's entrance silenced the room momentarily. She had spent months in therapy, confronting the roots of her controlling behavior, understanding how her own fears had nearly destroyed 3 generations of her family. The proud matriarch had learned humility through painful self-reflection. "I don't expect forgiveness," she began, echoing words Keith had spoken months before. "But I want to try to be the grandmother these children deserve." Her voice, once commanding, now carried a gentle uncertainty. She placed the envelope on the counter documents, transferring a significant portion of Warburton assets into trusts for all 3 children, with Michelle and Victoria as trustees. The twins, now 9, watched their grandmother with cautious curiosity. Oliver, fully recovered, analyzed her with his characteristic thoughtfulness. Carl, ever protective, stayed close to his mother but showed signs of his natural warmth breaking through. But Michelle's response surprised everyone. "The children need to know their heritage, all of it, the good and the bad. If you're willing to be honest with them, to love them for who they are, rather than what you want them to be, there might be a place for you in their lives." Andrew and Michelle's relationship had deepened through the months of family healing. Their friendship, built on years of trust and shared experiences, blossomed into something more as they worked together to help the family heal. Their wedding plans reflected the blend of worlds they'd created: simple yet elegant, traditional yet uniquely their own. Keith found his role as father evolving in unexpected ways. He learned to balance time between all 3 children, supporting Haley's artistic talents with the same enthusiasm he showed for Oliver's academic achievements or Carl's athletic pursuits. Victoria's decision to return to New York, seeing Kimberly's genuine changes, allowed their daughter to maintain connections with both sides of her family. The cafe became the heart of this reconstructed family. Sunday brunches turned into a tradition where Warburton cousins shed their social pretenses, enjoying simple pleasures and genuine conversation. The community that had supported Michelle through her darkest times was embraced as part of the extended family. Kimberly's transformation became evident in small ways. She learned to sit quietly and listen to her grandchildren's stories without offering direction. She found joy in simple moments, helping Carl with his baseball practice, discussing science with Oliver, or admiring Haley's artwork. The wedding day arrived with spring sunshine and cherry blossoms. Bean Brew's interior had been transformed, fairy lights twinkling among white drapes and flower arrangements. The ceremony reflected the joining of 2 worlds: the simple beauty of Michelle's cafe life melding with the elegant traditions of the Warburton family. Carl and Oliver walked their mother down the aisle, while Haley scattered rose petals. Keith stood as Andrew's best man, their brotherhood restored through shared understanding and forgiveness. Victoria sat beside Kimberly, both women watching the next chapter of their complex family story unfold. The ceremony itself was brief but meaningful. Andrew and Michelle exchanged vows that spoke of second chances, of love growing through adversity, of family bonds strengthened by choice rather than obligation. The cafe's regular customers, seated among social elites, represented the bridging of worlds that had once seemed impossibly far apart. The first year after Andrew and Michelle's wedding brought changes that reshaped the family landscape. Bean Brew expanded to include a medical clinic in the adjacent building, where Andrew could combine his profession with family life. The space between cafe and clinic became a shared family area, where all 3 children did homework under the watchful eyes of both their parents. The blended family dynamics evolved naturally. Keith, now living nearby, found a balance between his corporate responsibilities and family time. He stepped down as CEO of Warburton Industries, choosing instead a role that allowed him to be present for school plays, sports games, and daily family dinners. The transformation from corporate titan to engaged father suited him, bringing back the genuine smile Michelle had first fallen in love with. Victoria's return to New York with Haley marked another positive change. She purchased a brownstone walking distance from both the cafe and Keith's new apartment, allowing Haley to maintain strong relationships with both parents. The young girl blossomed in this arrangement, developing close bonds with her brothers while maintaining her own unique identity. The twins' acceptance of their expanded family came through small, significant moments. Carl began inviting Keith to his baseball games, proudly introducing him as "my dad" to teammates. Oliver would seek out his father's advice on science projects, discovering they shared the same analytical approach to problems. Both boys found in Andrew a unique blend of uncle and stepfather, someone who had always been there and now had an official place in their family. Haley's integration into the family brought unexpected joy. She shared Oliver's love of books, spent hours drawing with Carl, and found in Michelle a maternal figure who encouraged her artistic pursuits without the weight of Warburton expectations. Weekend sleepovers at the cafe became treasured traditions, with all three children helping prepare Sunday morning pastries. Kimberly's role evolved into something softer and more genuine. She learned to visit without attempting to control, to love without conditions, to appreciate each grandchild's unique qualities. Her greatest triumph came when the children began looking forward to her visits, no longer sensing the tension that had once accompanied her presence. The cafe's community embraced this expanded family configuration. Regular customers watched with approval as Keith learned to operate the espresso machine, as Victoria displayed her photography on the cafe walls, as Haley set up a small art corner where she would sketch customers. The space that had once been Michelle's refuge became a symbol of family healing. Professional lives adapted to support this new reality. Keith restructured Warburton Industries to be more family-friendly, implementing policies that prioritized work-life balance. Victoria pursued her passion for photography, turning the cafe's walls into a rotating gallery. Andrew's clinic became known for its family-centered approach to healthcare. The children's relationships deepened beyond simple sibling bonds. Oliver took on the role of academic mentor to Haley, helping her with math while she taught him to appreciate art. Carl's protective nature extended to include his sister, making sure she felt included in all their adventures. Together, they created their own traditions and inside jokes, building the kind of family bonds that couldn't be manufactured or forced. Michelle and Victoria developed an unexpected friendship, bonding over the shared experience of navigating the Warburton family dynamics. Their cooperation in raising three children between them became a model of modern family adaptation, proving that love could transcend traditional boundaries. Weekly family dinners became a cherished tradition, rotating between the cafe, Victoria's brownstone, and Keith's apartment. These gatherings, free from the formality that had characterized Warburton family events in the past, allowed genuine connections to flourish. Stories were shared, laughter flowed freely, and the children witnessed the power of forgiveness and growth. The transformation of Bean Brew from a simple cafe to the heart of this complex family unit symbolized their journey. The space evolved to accommodate their growing needs while maintaining its warm, welcoming atmosphere. It remained a testament to Michelle's initial vision while embracing the unexpected turns that had brought them all together. On the 10th anniversary of Bean Brew's opening, Michelle stood behind the counter, watching her expanded family gather for a celebration that would have seemed impossible a decade ago. The cafe had become more than a business, it was a living testament to the power of resilience, forgiveness, and the true meaning of family. Keith, now comfortable in casual attire, helped Carl arrange chairs while discussing his latest baseball game. Oliver and Haley sat at their usual corner table, heads bent together over a science project that combined her artistic skills with his analytical mind. Andrew moved between his clinic patients and the cafe, his professional and personal lives seamlessly integrated. Victoria adjusted her camera settings, documenting candid moments of this unconventional family gathering. The transformation of the Warburton legacy was evident in every interaction. Where once there had been rigid formality, now there was genuine warmth. The social barriers that had seemed insurmountable had dissolved in the face of authentic connections. Money and status had given way to something far more valuable: real relationships built on understanding and acceptance. Sometimes, Michelle addressed the gathered crowd, the family you build is stronger than the family you're born into. Every person in this room has taught me that love doesn't follow social rules or bloodlines. It grows in the most unexpected places, between the most unlikely people. If we just give it a chance. The cafe's community, which had sustained Michelle through her darkest days, now blended seamlessly with the Warburton social circle. Sarah Chen's flowers decorated tables where corporate executives sat alongside local teachers. Eddie Thompson discussed investment strategies with young entrepreneurs who had started their businesses with his guidance. Kimberly, seated quietly in a corner, watched her grandchildren with genuine joy rather than calculating assessment. Her own journey from controlling matriarch to loving grandmother demonstrated perhaps the most profound transformation. I learned, she shared softly with those nearby, that legacy isn't about maintaining appearances or controlling outcomes. It's about nurturing the unique gifts each generation brings. The children had grown into living bridges between two worlds. They moved easily between the cafe's warm simplicity and the Warburton social obligations, taking the best from both environments. Their natural confidence came not from family name or wealth, but from knowing they were loved unconditionally by an extensive network of people who had chosen to become family. Andrew and Michelle's marriage proved that love could heal old wounds and create new beginnings. Their relationship, built on years of friendship and trust, showed how shared values and genuine care could transform pain into purpose. The clinic and cafe, standing side by side, became symbols of how different worlds could complement each other perfectly. Keith and Victoria's co-parenting demonstrated that failed relationships could evolve into meaningful partnerships. Their ability to put their children's needs first, to support each other's growth, and to maintain respect, despite past hurts, offered a powerful lesson in maturity and grace. The cafe itself stood as a physical manifestation of life's most important lessons. Its walls had witnessed countless moments of kindness, forgiveness, and growth. Every scratch on its tables, every worn spot on its floor, told stories of lives intertwined, of community supporting individuals, of love transcending boundaries. As the celebration continued into the evening, Michelle raised her glass to make a final toast to the family we choose, the love we build, and the understanding that our differences make us stronger. May we never forget that true wealth isn't in bank accounts or social status, it's in the connections we forge and the hearts we touch. The legacy of Bean Brew had become far richer than merely serving coffee. It had become a place where social classes melted away, where family meant more than blood, and where every person who walked through its doors had the chance to belong to something genuine and meaningful. Dear valued viewers, if this story touched your heart, please share your thoughts and feelings in the comments below. We'd love to hear about similar experiences, or what this family's journey means to you. Support our team by subscribing to the channel and stay updated with more meaningful stories that celebrate love, forgiveness, and family bonds. Every subscription helps us continue creating content that matters. Share this video with friends and loved ones who might find comfort or inspiration in this story of healing and redemption. Your sharing could help someone going through similar challenges. Don't forget to hit the like button if you enjoyed this story. Each like encourages us to keep bringing you authentic, heartfelt narratives that remind us of the power of love and forgiveness. Thank you for being part of our storytelling community.